All right, welcome to a new edition of Believe in 49ers presented by the Believe Podcast Network and Bet Online. I'm your host, Tommy Call III. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy_III. That is triple I for the third. But for the first time, I'm excited to introduce my new co-host, our new co-host, Evan Giddings. Evan Avon? It's Evan, right?
Yeah, EVAN, Evan, even, I'm leaving, however you want to call it, man. I got you. I'm just happy to be rocking with you, Tom. So really excited to be a part of this.
Absolutely. And it is just nice to have somebody on the other side. You can follow on Evan on Twitter at Evan A Giddings. And Evan, really interesting start to our career, future, whatever you want, partnership on Believe in 49ers, because some are calling this the worst loss of the Kyle Shanahan era in San Francisco. Not a pretty one to get things started for episode 1, but here we are.
Yeah, you mentioned the capital A in the name. I don't know if you want to give the game grade an F for the 49ers, but it's funny you mentioned the worst loss in history, because immediately I started going down gambling lines, right? How much of the 49ers have been favored by? I think this game opened at about 6.5, 7 points. The only other game that I could find, ironically, is the last time the 49ers were 1-2, and you got to go back to 2022 in Denver, week 3, when Jimmy Garoppolo stepped out of bounds. It was the pick 6 that turned into eventually 2 points for the Broncos. They were 9.5-point favorites in Denver. So if you want to roll with Las Vegas, technically the second or third loss, worst loss in the Shanahan era, but you're absolutely right as far as expectations, as far as a bounce back performance, a get right game. The San Francisco 49ers had to bring it this week, and they did for about 3.5 quarters, and then everything seemingly fell apart at SoFi Stadium before God and country.
You mentioned a really interesting name here, and I had written that down before we got into it. But before we get there, a little quick message from our friends over at Bet Online. Bet Online is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. Bet Online has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. Think you know your stuff? Get in on our $200,000, Evan, mega contest, and pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of the $200K. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack, poker, or unwind with one of our 150 slot games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Bet Online, the game starts here. How'd I do? What's the grade on that?
I'll give you a B+, and I'm feeling optimistic. I'm feeling like it should be a giving time in the year, especially with the 49ers giving that game away to the Los Angeles Rams today. So I'll give you a B+ Tom. We could do a bit better. I know this is our first episode together.
We could. And so getting into the game, I think the question is what went wrong, right? How did this happen? And you brought up some good points, because there's nothing, I can't look at this, and I've been spending the last couple hours trying to think about this, think of what we're going to say, think of what we're going to write about. And there's not anything directly you can point the finger at. Obviously, there's some things went wrong, but in the past, this feels like a type of loss. You go, Jimmy Garoppolo is not good enough, right? Like where he kind of has like those highlighter games where even he'd come back down to earth or throw a couple brutal interceptions, or have from the first quarter to the fourth quarter just not be good enough. Last year, kind of when they were sliding, you could point the finger at Steve Wilks. That experience not necessarily working out. This game feels different than those, because I think the 49ers lost, not that the Rams won, if that makes sense, but I don't know how. Because Brock Purdy played well. Jauan Jennings had a almost historic performance. So there was a lot of things. I know it went right, but what went wrong, Evan?
Well, the real question is what didn't go wrong down the stretch of that game. So I do our kickoff show, our pregame show at 95.7 The Game, and myself, along with Lorenzo Neal, also Believe podcast host for the Chargers, we're trying to figure out, okay, what do the Niners basically need to not do in order to walk away with a win, right? On paper, you're a bit banged up offensively, but defensively, you got the whole cast of characters. The Los Angeles Rams are down both of their top two receivers. Half of their offensive line has been in and out. They got third stringers in there. Defensively, it's a young group. They're missing Aaron Donald. This is a game the 49ers should get, and it's reflected in the 6.5-point line. However, this is a game in which the Niners, in my opinion, to your point, offensively, were not beaten in this game. They beat themselves on defense and particularly on special teams. And if you're losing two of the three phases in the game, I know a lot of people like to look at the quarterback, look at the head coach. In my opinion, if you're losing two of the three phases, you're not going to win the football game. And that's been the Niners' biggest Achilles heel, is that they have not put together a complete performance the past 2 weeks. And I thought you brought up a great point about them losing this game juxtaposed to week 2 against Minnesota. I think the Vikings just flat out beat them. That was a game the 49ers lost. You couldn't say that they were better today.
They didn't play well.
No, not at all. But this week they did play well. And that's the more frustrating part, is that if the Niners are bringing different facets to this game as far as, an A grade is concerned, is that A grade good enough to beat a team that probably should be 0-3 at this point? That's got to make that panic or worry meter move a bit in the northern direction if you're a Niners fan. And that's why a lot of people are just scratching their heads, pulling their hair out, wondering, oh my gosh, we're 1-2, and I'm not exactly sure how we correct this thing in the immediate.
And I think what makes it especially hard is just kind of like trying to dissect this from the start, right? You go Brock Purdy, and then I was wondering, through 2 games, one thing that stuck out to me is I didn't think Kyle Shanahan has called two of his best games as a 49ers play caller to start out the season, especially in Minnesota. I thought he went away from the run game at times and kind of put a lot of pressure on Brock Purdy and Deebo Samuel specifically, and kind of counted on those guys to bail them out when things got tough at the end. And I think out of the 3 games to start the season, I thought Kyle Shanahan called a pretty darn good game with, thinking about without Christian McCaffrey, without George Kittle, without Deebo Samuel. I mean, guys were open. The offense was flowing, and Brock Purdy was kind of commanding things without those guys fairly well. And if you look at his numbers, 22 of 30, 292 yards and 3 touchdown passes, his highest quarterback rating of the season at 137.1. He had 6 drops. Say he gets 3 of those back, you're talking 25 of 30 against the Rams on the road, divisional opponent. All those kind of mix for, that's a hard thing to do, to go on the road in your division and put up those type of numbers, especially no interceptions. So I would say, I think Brock Purdy did more than enough. I don't think you point the finger anywhere near him. And that's kind of crazy to say, because I'm definitely one of those guys that likes to go after the quarterback. You can talk about, he missed Brandon Aiyuk late, and that hurt them, but I don't think it boils down to that. When you look at 13 today, you've got to be kind of not more than satisfied in that performance. And I think he absolutely put them in the position to win. And I think that's what makes this specifically between Shanahan and him so difficult to kind of stomach for 49er fans out there today.
Yeah, I mean, look, all you needed was a 2nd and 10 catch with under a minute left from Ronnie Bell, and you're probably talking about a victory right now, but that didn't happen. And that's not the only play that lost in this football game. There was a bevy of plays you could point to. The special teams play right after. The Rams get it back at the 50-yard line. They have no timeouts. The only way that they go down and get the field goal is if somebody makes a play either on defense or special teams, and that's what they did. I thought Brock Purdy was honestly sensational in this game, but one thing he said after the game is, to me, where this entire 2-week stretch, the beginning of the season, quite frankly, falls down to, which is, this is not last season. This 49ers team, even though they're constructed very similarly to last year, is not the same group. And I don't know if you attribute that to a Super Bowl hangover. I don't know if you attribute it to guys missing time in camp. Trent Williams was in and out with cramps today. He, of course, missed all of training camp. Brandon Aiyuk has not looked like the number 1 receiver they paid $120 million to. I don't know if him missing the majority of training camp and preseason is something you can attribute that to, but something is not right with this football team. I mean, even their all-pro Charvarius Ward was getting beat deep late in the second half of this game. So it's hard for me to point my finger at one particular person. And even the coaching staff, if you look on paper, this is a game that the Niners won up and down. First downs plus, third downs, they were better. Total yards, they were better. Possession,
not only were they
better.
Not only were they better, they were nearly double better in total yards. I mean, it was 400 something yards to 200. That number alone, I think, is really just a tough pill to swallow when you're thinking about all these things that went right. If you put up 400 yards against a team like the Rams, who defensively don't have it, offensively missing a lot of guys, that alone should hopefully put you in the position to win the game. And I think that's just a really kind of jarring number when I'm looking up and down the box score. At that one, my eyes were glued right away.
Yeah, another big number that jumps off the board is 3.7 yards a pop on the ground for Kyren Williams. I know he had 3 touchdowns in this game, but it wasn't like he was running roughshod the way that Aaron Jones and Ty Chandler were last week. Matthew Stafford was held to 220 yards, and much of it was due to a 50-yard bomb late. They kept the Rams offensively in check, but they could not put them away enough early. This was a game at half that was 14-7. That probably should have been 21-0, or at the very least 21-7. But they could not close the door on the Rams early enough to not give a Sean McVay-led team hope. And it's funny because Kyle Shanahan has had the number of McVay throughout the entire regular season. And today, McVay, along with Stafford, got the best of them. They made a couple of plays when they need to, but the first kick of the season that goes wide for Jake Moody. He's been perfect up until this point. Misses an opportunity to put the game away. The Niners had this game in their grasp, but for whatever reason, could not get the nail in the coffin play from anybody. And, they're missing McCaffrey. They're missing Debo. They're missing Kittle in this game. It's understandable, but someone had to step up that is not necessarily expected to, and they just could not do it. Jauan Jennings was awesome. Ronnie Bell had a drop. Aiyuk had a couple of drops. There was just too many missed opportunities for the Niners today to say that they were a better team than the Los Angeles Rams, and quite frankly, that should be very concerning for Niner fans.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're cooking early here because in the post-game piece that I wrote just a handful of minutes ago, one of the things I talked about the most, that was at the top of the story, was missed opportunities. And I think that is the thing that you can kind of sum this game down to in a way, because all those things you had just mentioned just enabled their inability to kind of put that nail in the coffin. And I think, like you mentioned, there are so many different things that's why this game I think is really interesting to diagnose specifically, because there's so many different angles you can kind of attack it on. And I want to ask you about the special teams specifically, just because, Evan, I mean, what's going on there? Because it's clearly it's a problem. It's a problem. Last week, a blocked punt that results in points. This week, a fake punt, and then you want to talk about the punt coverage, right? That the guy Xavier, I'm blanking on his last name all of a sudden, but who returned.
And you shouldn't have to know his name. That's the whole point.
It's a practice squad call up. A guy that was his first touch in his NFL career returns the ball 38 yards to the 50-yard line. You're telling Matt Stafford he essentially needs to get 15, 25 yards to boom a long field goal at that point, because we know how these kickers are, this season in the NFL. And once that kickoff went the way, that punt went the way it went, it felt over to me. And it was kind of poetic that would be the thing that would really put the nail in the 49ers coffin, was the punt coverage specifically. And I know there's a lot of people pointing the finger about the fake punt. That's just something that happens. Obviously, the Rams saw something on film. Kyle Shanahan spoke about it after the game. They knew the fake punt was going, and they still were able to get the edge. Well, that's a tough answer to kind of give after a play like that, because that drive did result in points. And then you flip it to the other side, the punt coverage. You can boil in Moody's kick in there if you want to, about special teams specifically, but there is a funk over that facet of the football that, these football guy terms that we love throwing around about winning all 3 phases of the game. Well, the 49ers, I mean, in 2 of the 3 games, potentially in all 3 of them, if Jake Moody doesn't make 6 field goals in week 1, that they lose that every week, essentially. And it's how do you fix that? That's something that you think about in training camp and stuff. And for a team like the 49ers, that has been maybe the second best team of an era, the second best team over these last couple of years, that we've never really had to worry or think too much about. And they've invested high draft picks and specialists. And today and last week, it's something that's funky. And I think other teams around the NFL who they're going to play them will go, hey, we might be able to get him in the special teams side, which is a problem.
Well, it's attention to detail. It's discipline. It's things that the Niners have generally been the better team at. And look, I know Deebo Samuel and Brandon Aiyuk made headlines earlier this week talking about how they've been the best team for the past several seasons. And whether you agree with them or not, they've had the most Pro Bowlers in the last 3 seasons. They've had the most All Pros in the last 3 seasons. They've had the most talented roster in the NFL, which has made the shortcomings so frustrating. But also, when you lose some of those guys, okay, well, now you're playing in the real NFL. To take the words out of Steve Kerr's mouth, this is the real NBA. Like, you are now playing with everyone else that also is dealing with injuries, a la the Los Angeles Rams. And it's interesting because if you look up and down at the other teams that won in week 3, a lot of upsets, but a lot of teams that just hurt themselves repeatedly and lost to inferior opponents who were more buttoned up. And the Niners were not that today. They certainly weren't that last week against the Vikings. And it just comes down to me, not an approach that was even prevalent in preseason that is going to tell you that they are going to hit the ground running. Last year, it was so much easier to see how locked in, how gauged, zeroed in they were at the beginning of the year, which led to a 5-0 start. I have not seen that level of play. And I've not seen that level of attention to detail. So if you're the 49ers, you can either take that as, well, we're not that far away. We still have the talent. We just have to tighten some things up. But to me, it is concerning that they have not been able to do that against a Vikings team who's proven themselves to be pretty good, but against a Rams team that you, number one, should be beaten or should beat. But number two, you kind of have a chance to close their season. An 0-3 start means you're not destined for the playoffs in the majority of years. And this is a division opponent that you have now opened the door for to give them some life that you're going to have to see later on down the line. So the Niners, I think, missed a huge opportunity today, not just to get back above 500 for themselves, but also to put a pin in an opponent that was expected to compete for the NFC West. So on multiple levels, I think they missed a huge opportunity.
I completely agree with you. I think you make a good point about I also think at this state, like where the 49ers are, it's kind of a badge to put a team away like that. For the last 2 years specifically, there's been a lot of chatter and we spend time talking about how the 49ers kind of beat teams up, right? Like after they play them, there was that record, I think it was the year before last, where after you play the 49ers, you're almost guaranteed to lose that next week because of the kind of the weight they put on you. And today it felt the opposite of it. It felt like they were dodging that at different times. And, them not being able to put this team away, a team that I think they should absolutely beat just because, we haven't mentioned it probably as much as we should, or I don't know how much we're putting into the fact that they're missing a Christian McCaffrey, that they're missing guys like Deebo Samuel and the impact that takes. But the way this game went, it's almost like you didn't feel their absence because of the flow of the game. One guy that was on the field but felt like he wasn't for the 3rd straight week is Brandon Aiyuk. And I want to ask you, Evan, like, what's the worry meter there? Because, for the 3rd straight week, relatively quiet. 5 catches, 48 yards. That's not a stat line we are used to seeing from Brandon Aiyuk. And on top of that, a couple drops. The connection with Brock Purdy, to me, it does seem rusty or stale or whatever you want to call it. And I kind of thought, I said, is that connection with Kyle Shanahan not there? Well, this week, 10 targets, and he's only walking away with 5 catches. That's double the targets he's gotten through the first 2 weeks of the season. He was very much a part of the game plan and didn't come through. And maybe it opened up things. We got to rewatch the game a little bit and see what it looked like. Did he open up things for Jauan Jennings? I don't know yet, but there's something funky going on. What's the panic meter? What's the worry meter? How are you feeling about number 11 through 3 weeks?
It's high as it's never been for Brandon Aiyuk. And this isn't an indictment of his character. It's not an indictment of his work ethic. But clearly, what I've learned this week and what I think we've learned the first 3 weeks is that this is a guy who is paid as a top 5 number 1 wide receiver in the NFL. That's not who he is. He's not. These are the kinds of games that those players own. And again, if you look around the league, someone even like at the tight end position, Dallas Goedert, went absolutely off against the New Orleans Saints after Devontae Smith went down. You don't have A.J. Brown. Okay, so there's one guy that can go get the ball and make a play. That's Dallas Goedert. Rashee Rice on Sunday Night Football, the number 1 receiver for the Kansas City Chiefs. He went out 12 catches, $110 and a touchdown. He helped them win that football game. He was the reason why they won. You can even look at a Deontay Johnson now with a new quarterback. He is at least on the same page with Andy Dalton. They upset the Las Vegas Raiders. You just go down the list of number 1 receivers. Malik Neighbors, who's a rookie, has been sensational, but he's clearly locked in with Daniel Jones. These are number one options and number one guys. And for whatever reason, Brandon Aiyuk has not proven yet that he can be that player. I think when he operates in the system, I think when he has the surrounding cast around him, he is a very effective player. He's clearly a second team All-Pro. He's efficient as hell. But when he has to be the dude, he has not proven yet that he can be that player. And that's concerning to me, considering Brock Purdy played his ass off today, made a ton of great throws, took care of the football. And yes, number 11 was not open as much as number 15, and that's where the ball went. But the fact that Jauan Jennings is on more of a page with his starting quarterback than the guy that's paid $120 million, that's a concern. And I don't want to be the guy that counts pockets, but when you make that money, you have those expectations. And on a day like this, in a game like this, it might not end up being the season, but it's a huge, huge defeat for them if they're trying to get where they want to go, which is winning the division, which is getting the 1 seed, which is getting back to the Super Bowl. And Brandon Aiyuk did not come through when they needed him to. And so, again, there's a lot of places you can put blame, but those places to put blame do not make the kind of money that Brandon Aiyuk makes, and that's why you're paid that kind of money to make these plays, and he just could not do it. And that's the frustrating part. So as far as worry, as far as concern revolving around number 11, it's as high as it's ever been for me for Brandon Aiyuk.
And I think, we speak a lot about he's making this money now and he absolutely should do X, Y, and Z and all these different things. I think that's as simple as it is. It's a really good point. I think through the Brandon Aiyuk negotiations, just from where I stood, I was kind of an advocate for listen, this guy's just playing the game. It's part of the business that guys pulled out. They want more money. It's just kind of part of the state of the NFL. It happens every season on every team. Brandon Aiyuk's obviously went extended. It got to a point of nausea for some. But now, if you're going to kind of talk the talk, you got to walk the walk to an extent. And I think for a guy like Brandon Aiyuk, who was, constantly speculated to different teams, right? We talked so much trade chatter where he would be the number one at this team. Well, for his team now, for the San Francisco 49ers, now he is the number one. And Evan, it's not like next week, Deebo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle, all those guys are just going to be back. This is going to be kind of a rinse and repeat against the New England Patriots 7 days from now, where you're going to need Brandon Aiyuk to wake up. And I think you made a good point about the aspect of the season where it's are these guys going to get on the same page during the regular season? Is that what training camp's valuable for? Is that what Brandon Aiyuk missed on? Because that might be worth its weight in gold, him being on a different page from Brandon Aiyuk specifically. And I opened the podcast talking about not knowing who to point the finger at. And I think we've spent some time talking about Brandon Aiyuk specifically, but there's two other guys that I kind of want to mention on that list before we get out here. And one guy that I think deserves some praise from this game specifically, and this might be a minor thing, 1 catch, 12 yards for Ronnie Bell, but two very tough drops. And I get the play in the fourth quarter would have been a great catch, right? That would have been a highlight reel catch, but he put his hands on it and should have caught the ball. My question with that is drops happen, those type of things happen. For a guy like Ronnie Bell, Evan, shout out Ronnie Brown, though, Wildcat.
He might have caught that ball. Yeah. I don't
know. What has he done to kind of earn that opportunity? Because he was involved today in that offense. And I think specifically why I bring this up is because what has he done that Jacob Cowing hasn't, right? Because if this was a month ago and we're talking about coming off the preseason and things like that, you look at Jacob Cowing going this is a dude. This guy can play. And I know, Evan, we are pseudo Pac-12 guys being out here on the West Coast, and we saw what Cowing did at Arizona in this final season there. And I was very excited when he landed with the 49ers because I was like, this guy's a football player. Take that for what it will. But Ronnie Bell has, I think his career is kind of defined by just some mistakes, just kind of underwhelming for the most part, where you have a guy like Jacob Cowing, who, he did muff the punt last week, but overall, I don't know why we're seeing Ronnie Bell reps at this point when you have a guy like Cowing who seems to have done what it takes to at least get a rep or two as a pass catcher.
I mean, to me, it just comes down to the fact that he's got an R in parentheses next to his name. Like Kyle Shanahan doesn't trust rookies. And to be fair, Ronnie Bell had to be a rookie that stepped up in a couple of games last year. They weren't as important. Got his first touchdown against the New York Giants in a game where they were down one of their receivers. He's put himself in a position, I think, to earn more trust. But it's interesting, too, because I think there is some reason that Kyle Shanahan doesn't really trust rookies. You mentioned that punt return in which the Rams practice squad player took it up to the 50-yard line. If a rookie, Malik Mustafa, makes that tackle, we're not talking right now about the Rams potentially winning this football game. There's a reason why Isaac Guerrero is not toting the rock as much as a lot of people believe that he should be. It's because Kyle Shanahan doesn't trust rookies. And so maybe that's an indictment on the head coach and his style. But at the same time, I think Kyle Shanahan's a pretty brilliant dude. So the fact that Ronnie Bell was in the position to make the play means that he's earned that. And he might, Shanahan, have to adjust that ideology moving forward, because that ball hit him squarely between the numbers and was a huge, as big as any drop across all of the NFL this week. And everybody's going to be talking about him tomorrow. That highlight's going to be played on rerun because Brock Purdy put it right where he needed to be, and then they couldn't make a play on 3rd and 10. So, why is Ronnie Bell in the game as opposed to someone else? I think it's just because the Niners have enough trust in him, and now they need to reevaluate that trust the same way they need to reevaluate their trust in some of their special teams players, maybe some of the members on defense. I'm not so sure where they go as far as answers, because I think the reason that we're overreacting to this loss is because they also were beaten up pretty badly last week. If they were 2-1 right now and they'd won the game on paper, there might be a different tone. But because they have injuries, because there's uncertainty, because there was offseason distractions, there are reasons now you look at the 49ers and saying, that Super Bowl contention that they had coming into the year, people are going to be putting that in question tomorrow, and understandably so, because they did not look like a Super Bowl contender. In fact, they didn't look like an NFC West division contender earlier today at SoFi Stadium against a team that they should have put away.
Yeah, you look at the NFC West specifically, and we obviously just saw the Rams up close and personal, but the Seattle Seahawks, they're 3-0, absolutely handled Skylar Thompson and the Miami Dolphins today. And then you go over to the desert in Arizona, and I don't know, Evan, that team's, I know they lost today, but that team's just frisky. Like they'll clip you if the 49ers put a performance together like they did today. I think the Cardinals jump on that because that offense is just fun. They're gritty. Jonathan Gannon, we saw a bit of it last year with a myriad of backup quarterbacks there in Arizona, and now they have Kyler back fully. It's tough. It's tough sledding. It's tougher than I think what we started this season with, the outlook specifically in the NFC West.
Yeah, and for whatever reason, Arizona has also given the 49ers fits. I mean, I remember going and covering a game in 2021 where Colt McCoy and Eno Benjamin just ran up and down Levi's Stadium and thrashed the 49ers during a season in which, by the way, went 13-4. So the Cardinals have beaten the Niners even when the Niners have been playing their best football as a whole. And the fact now that they are much better, more improved, and an up-and-coming squad with belief in themselves. I know they lost today, but that's a damn good Detroit Lions team that they lost to at home, and they potentially made that a football game. So no, you're right. The NFC West is much better than it was, especially last season. And I didn't expect the 49ers to come in and just steamroll, go 5-1 like they did last year, and basically have it come down to a backup quarterback game in week 18 to determine whether they go 6-0 against the division. But this season, I mean, to go 4-2 at this point, I think would be a win for the 49ers, the way that they look so far, and especially the way that the rest of the NFC West looks, Tommy.
Absolutely. And, I don't want to get too far ahead because I was looking at the schedule earlier, and you see Arizona coming up, and you have hopefully the chance for a bit of a much needed get right game against a team that is essentially trying to lose with the New England Patriots, who we saw them just absolutely inept offensively on Thursday Night Football this week, which you have on the calendar. So that should make you feel a little bit better. But before we get to the good stuff, I have to mention this, Evan. He's been so frustrating to watch. And I understand kind of why the 49ers signed him. And before we even get to him, today I think was the game you missed Dre Greenlaw most. And I think Devondre Campbell, shout out to him as a tackler. And I understand he might have some juice in the run game, but the guy cannot cover. And you have to obviously be able to do that in the 2024 version of the NFL. But I mean, I wanted to bring this up because in recent memory, I can't think of a guy, and you might stump me on it right away. I can't think of a guy that's been such a mismatch for the 49ers defense. Like, In the past, if you ever talked about what went wrong with the 49ers, I'll bring right back to it. You probably started and stopped with Jimmy Garoppolo. You didn't look at a guy like, well, this guy blew it. Well, Devondre Campbell was an absolute liability, I thought, out there today. Sean McVay and Matt Stafford absolutely went after him. It seems like in the past, the 49ers have always been on the right side of targeting a mismatch constantly, where Kyle Shanahan would focus in on one guy and they'd absolutely torment him and expose those weaknesses. Today, they were on the opposite side of the foot. And you talked about earlier Sean McVay kind of getting the best of Kyle Shanahan in this game. I think right there is obviously kind of like a 10-8 round specifically to McVay and company, because as soon as 59 was out there, you saw Matt Stafford, audible plays over to him, just throw it his way because he knew he was going to get a defensive pass interference. And I mean, we knew that when we signed him. He was that target when the 49ers played the Green Bay Packers in the past. Mm-hmm. And you're putting him out there in pass coverage. I don't know if that's on Nick Sorensen. I don't know if they have anyone else. I know D. Winters was a little bit banged up and forced Devondre Campbell back into the game, but it seems like at this point, I don't know why he's getting reps over a D. Winters, because it was ugly. And I think that just specifically this game was highlighted by him. It was bad.
Devondre Campbell is in 2024 what Isaiah Oliver, I think, was in 2023, which is a guy that just because of the talent that's on that defense, you're looking at guys to use and abuse. Well, I'm sorry, he sticks out like a sore thumb because it's just difficult to throw at Charvarius Ward. It's difficult to throw at Diamador Lenore, who looks like a stud number 2 cornerback, maybe even a number 1 at times. And you're obviously not going to pick on Fred Warner. So who's the guy that's standing out there? Who's the short straw? It's Devondre Campbell. But again, it comes down to that situation in the game. That is what a great quarterback, a great play caller is going to do. It's the same thing that Kyle Shanahan would have done if he was on the other sideline holding the clipboard. See that guy over there? Yeah, flex the tight end out, solo him out, put that ball up, and see what happens. Because if you don't make that play, there's no risk. There's no downside to an incompletion there. You're running the next play, but you could potentially get that PI. So again, whether it's Ronnie Bell, whether it's Devondre Campbell, whether it's Jake Moody, these are all young players. Well, Devondre Campbell's not young, but as far as guys that have been asked to step into positions that they probably should not be in the first place, they came up short. And so again, they should not have been there in the first place, but they needed one of those 3, maybe another player as well, to just make one play. And there's 10 of them across this game that we can pinpoint, and they didn't seem to make any of them. And that's why they're looking at a last-second loss when they had a 14-point lead in the second half.
Absolutely. And it's a tough one. It's a tough one. I'm excited to actually watch this game a little bit back, because I want to see some of these moments firsthand. And it's something that hopefully we'll try to get to the bottom of, especially the special team stuff, because it is such a head scratcher. I think even after talking with you for the last 30 minutes about it, it's still a game you walk away from going like, wow, I can't believe the 49ers lost that. I think specifically because we kind of bypassed it and mentioned it a little bit, but Jauan Jennings, I mean, what can you say about the guy? I think anybody that is a fan of football, it's hard to not be a fan of Jauan Jennings, because he is that kind of, the great blocker, right? Your giddy player, 3rd and Jauan, a guy that's going to come up clutch for you. Well, today I feel like should be remembered as kind of like the Jauan Jennings arrival. Every football fan, from fantasy guys, betting, whatever you want to talk about, is speaking about 15 today. But obviously it is going to be clouded by the loss. My question for you, Evan, is even when George Kittle comes back, or when Deebo Samuel arrives, again, has Jennings done enough to kind of earn a role, or is he just going to would you like to see him shift back to just the 3rd down guy, the guy that's, your strong blocking wide receiver, or has he earned enough to be considered like a playmaker in this offense as a receiver?
Of any wide receiver that's on a second or further contract around the NFL, I don't know if there's a better value right now than Jauan Jennings, because he's on a 2-year, $15 million deal. I think 10 of it's guaranteed, but this has been coming for quite some time now. I mean, you watched every playoff game last year. There were games when Deebo was a bit banged up. Maybe he didn't play well. Brandon Aiyuk, I think, has never had more than 80 yards receiving in a postseason game. They both have made big plays in the aerial attack, but it's been Jauan Jennings that has been the steady Eddie of this group, and he's a guy that Brock Purdy, seemingly, whether he's the 2nd or 3rd read, always seems to find the guy with the red hair underneath the gold cap wearing number 15. And it should be remembered. Jauan Jennings, I think in PPR leagues, had 46 points this week. Fantasy owners love Jauan Jennings. Your daily fantasy players love Jauan Jennings. But Similar to how I remember George Kittle had a quote after the Cincinnati loss last year where he had, I think it was like 8 catches for $160 and a touchdown, just tore up the Cincy secondary. They lost the game, and he said, it doesn't matter. And I think Jauan Jennings would share the same sentiment because he's about winning. He is a true 49er. He is a football player, as you've described, and he's someone that cares more about the letter W than the 11 catches and 3 touchdowns. So it sucks that it's going to go down in a loss, but you're right. It was a sensational performance, and one that I hope can at least give him some more confidence moving forward to be a little bit more involved, but also just be someone that we can expect to be a playmaker no matter what down, no matter what situation.
I'll tell you, I'm frustrated with the Jauan Jennings performance because each week now I have taken the over on his prop receiving total because it's like 24 yards, 32 yards. I think it was around 40 something today. And it's been just an absolute lock because we saw him in training camp. We see the connection there with Brock Purdy. It almost was a cheat code. And now obviously with a 175-yard receiving game and 3 touchdowns, that number is going to juice up quite a bit. Shout out to our guys over at Bet Online. They handle that kind of stuff. If you're interested. But Evan, that's going to do it for us here on Believe in 49ers. Before we get out the door, I totally blew it from the start. I didn't even really introduce you. It was just like we were just diving right into it. But
it's
Evan,
a big loss. Yeah, we got to get to the meat and potatoes here,
absolutely, man. Absolutely. If you stuck around this long enough, now you can kind of hear about the Evan Giddings experience and the Evan Giddings story. Evan, very talented. We actually used to work together at 95.7 The Game in San Francisco. If you are a Bay Area guy and listen to the radio, you've probably heard Evan at some point along the way. Does pre and post game work for the Golden State Warriors, does the pregame show for the 49ers on 95.7 The Game. And also Evan does a ton of play-by-play stuff. Him and I worked together. I think he produced a couple shows when I was doing on air, and I started as a producer there. So it's obviously very great to have you. For those who know and have listened, I've been begging to have a co-host on the show, and I couldn't be happier. It is Evan. So I'm very excited to kind of keep this thing rolling with you here, Mr. Giddings.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the kind intro. And yeah, look, man, involved in a lot of different projects in sports. We're both passionate about Bay Area sports in particular. And I'm just happy to be along the ride with you, Tommy. It's really fun to be a part of Believe Now. And I look forward to covering this team for the foreseeable future, for the rest of this season, because it looks like it's probably going to be a roller coaster ride. And so next week we might be on top of the world, or we might be even further beneath where we are right now, because it feels like to many this is the worst loss of the Kyle Shanahan era. I would kind of push back on that, but definitely not say you shouldn't be taking this game seriously, because this is one that is going to have people Monday morning quarterbacking all over the country. And so I'm just glad that we now have a forum to do it together. I love working with you, and I'm happy to be a part of the Believe family.
Thank you. And as always, you can hit both of us up on Twitter at Tommy_III and at Evan A. Giddings. Speaking for Evan, too, just I'll kind of always say this out the door. We both go beyond the average 49ers take. So if you want to talk some ball, got to take on upcoming baseball playoffs, college football, NFL draft, college hoops, transfer portal, Evan, transfer portal, cornhole, food, beer. You got an early favorite in the NFL draft. You got a prop bet. You got some daily fantasy. Whatever it is, we got you covered. Any of that speak out to you there? I know you're a transfer portal guy. You got to have some early transfer portal predictions from the college football season. Who's going where?
Oh, I thought you might have been talking college hoops, because I can tell you what, my boy Aiden Mahaney from St. Mary's that transferred to UConn is not going to be starting this season and is not going to get what he should have in Moraga, which was a number 1 option on a potential top 25 program. So, as far as college football, I'll have to do a little more digging for you there. But big college hoops guy, big Cal fan, big local WCC school supporter. Those are also the sports that I cover as far as play-by-play. So pretty much everything you mentioned except for cornhole. I might have to do some more research on that.
Yeah, we need you on the cornhole side of there's play-by-play out there for that too. And Aiden Mahaney, I'm a big college hoops fan too. I'm a Kentucky guy. Shout out Mark Pope. I was really looking forward to seeing what he could potentially do in a Mark Pope offense, shooting the 3 ball, just letting it rip. Obviously chose UConn, broke our hearts there in the Bluegrass State, but we rally. All right, Evan, that is going to do it for us here on Believe in 49ers. Episode 1, the new era, whatever you want to call it. Thank you again to our sponsor, Bet Online. Thank you, Evan. And most importantly, thank you for listening to Believe in 49ers, presented by Bet Online.